In early 1944, 8th Air Force records listed more than 220 bomber losses on missions where escort rotations broke down. That winter, one of those failures nearly repeated itself. 14 B-24 Liberators of the Form 46th Bomb Group crossed the Netherlands with only one surviving escort fighter left, a P-51B Mustang whose Packard Merlin engine was already failing. USAAF protocol said the pilot should break away and return to base. But if he had followed that rule, Luftwaffe JG 1, climbing out of Münster, would have hit the formation completely undefended. Cold wind tore at the wings as Harker drifted slightly below the formation. Radio discipline remained tight. Escorts were supposed to rotate in timed intervals, staying flexible, always maintaining altitude superiority. But none of that mattered now. Doctrine assumed engines behaved. Doctrine assumed escorts were healthy. Doctrine assumed timing stayed precise. None of those assumptions were true on this morning. As the first distant glints of sunlight reflected off approaching Bf-1019s, Harker sensed the widening gap between theory and survival. He nudged the throttle forward despite the warning rattle beneath the cowling. The Mustang groaned but obeyed. He eased directly under the lead Liberator, violating escort spacing rules, but creating a shield the gunners instantly recognized. The waist gunners shifted. The nose turret angled. Confidence returned to the formation. Ahead, the German fighters committed to their dive, sunlight flashing off their wings like falling blades. The bombers tightened instinctively, unaware that the man holding the most dangerous position was flying a machine that could die at any second. Yet as the first attack wave sharpened into view, Harker fixed his eyes on them, steadying his crippled fighter. The mission had barely begun, but already the sky was pushing him toward choices no rulebook had ever imagined. By early 1944, the air war over Europe had hardened into a mathematical science. Escort timing windows were measured in minutes, altitude blocks in exact hundreds of feet, and fuel calculations down to the gallon. The USAAF considered precision the only defense against a Luftwaffe that remained lethal even in retreat. In those planning rooms, a damaged escort fighter was a liability, one that should turn home the moment its engine readings drifted out of tolerance. Harker knew the rule, and his P-51B was signaling every warning it could. The oil pressure needle trembled near the red. The temperature gauge crept higher. The engine's rhythm faltered in soft, sickening skips. Everything pointed to one conclusion: leave the bombers and try to make it back across the North Sea before the engine seized entirely. Yet above Oldenburg, as flak bursts rose in erratic black blooms, the bomber stream was dangerously thin. Earlier turbulence had scattered part of the escort force. A second fighter group was delayed by unexpected cloud banks, and German radar stations ringing the northern German coast, Ulrich, Jever, Wangerooge, were already noting the Liberator's altitude. Their vectors would merge into an interception in minutes. If Harker left now, the Liberators would remain unprotected long enough for the first Luftwaffe wave to carve through them. He retested the throttle. The engine responded with a violent backfire that shook the cockpit. Instinct urged him to turn away, but memory held him in place. Only weeks earlier, he'd witnessed another formation lose 3 bombers in barely over a minute when escorts were caught out of position. The images had never left him, so instead of peeling toward England, he slid under the right wing of the lead B-24, accepting the unstable shudder of his failing engine. His position was unorthodox, inflexible, and strategically dangerous. He could neither climb nor pivot fast enough to counter a coordinated Luftwaffe strike, but he could fill the fatal seam that German fighters always aim for. Above the haze, specks of enemy aircraft thickened into attack formations. The Luftwaffe was tightening its run, unaware that the escort below them was flying on borrowed seconds. They appeared first as flickers, brief, sharp reflections above the contrail line, then merged into descending shapes. Jagerschwader 1 had executed this tactic hundreds of times. Attack from the sun, blind the formation, strike fast. Moments later, Bf-109Gs burst downward in a steep, disciplined dive, splitting into pairs as they targeted the vulnerable front-left bomber of the Liberator box. Even before gunners could shout warnings over intercoms, Harker recognized the angle. From his compromised position directly beneath the formation, he saw what no one else could. a perfectly timed attack that would slice into the bomber line. His engine wheezed as he nudged the control stick and pulled into a shallow climb. The Mustang resisted. Its coughing engine nearly stalled under the strain, but momentum carried him upward just enough to throw a crossing burst in the Germans' path. The tracers weren't meant to kill, only to disrupt. And they did. The first pair of 109s widened their dive, losing their strike angle. The bombers gained precious seconds. Suddenly, the air was alive with streaking light. 50 caliber guns roared from the Liberators, punching chaotic spirals of tracer fire into the wounded sky. Fragments of aluminum glittered as damaged fighters peeled away. A haze of oil mist spread from ruptured lines. The soundscape merged into a violent, layered thunder. Engines forced beyond limits, machine guns hammering rhythmically, bomb bay doors rattling in turbulence. Yet in the chaos, Harker moved with stubborn precision. He drifted across the bomber's nose, bluffing strength he no longer possessed. His Mustang vibrated dangerously as he pushed through maneuvers it wasn't built to sustain. But the Germans noticed. His unpredictable movement complicated their timing, forcing them to re-coordinate. As the first wave broke off, the sky momentarily settled into grim quiet. But high above the cloud sheet, another formation began assembling. Larger, more methodical. The Luftwaffe wasn't done. Their real attack was forming overhead, shaped not by speed but by patience. And Harker, fighting with a machine barely holding itself together, now stood between that second wave and a bomber formation already stretched to its limits. The Mustang should have died 10 minutes earlier. Its gauges screamed warnings. Coolant temperature rising, oil pressure dipping, manifold readings jumpy and erratic. The entire airframe vibrated as if trying to shake itself apart. Every time Harker banked harder than a gentle roll, the wings quivered in a deep metallic tremor that threatened to stall the aircraft outright. Yet the Liberators still needed him, and the sky around them began shifting in a way no escort pilot could afford to ignore. Meanwhile, the Luftwaffe adjusted its tactics. A six-ship element broke from the scattered remnants of the earlier attack and regrouped below the bomber stream. Instead of diving from above, they rose toward the formation's underbelly, a blind spot escorts rarely covered. Harker saw the movement too late for a standard intercept. His crippled Mustang couldn't climb. It couldn't roll fast enough, but it could drop. He chopped throttle and kicked the rudder hard, sending the Mustang into a violent side slip that bled speed in seconds. The aircraft lurched downward, stabilizing just beneath the bomber formation at the exact moment the German fighters pulled up into firing alignment. He didn't need accuracy. He only needed presence. His sudden appearance forced the German element into a hurried correction, scraping seconds off their perfect timing. The delay was fatal. For them. Waist gunners aboard the B-24s unleashed a curtain of 50 caliber fire upward and outward. The lead German fighter took the brunt, its fuselage erupting in fragments that spiraled through the frozen air. The remaining 109 scattered, their neat climb broken into defensive maneuvers. But Harker's gamble came with a cost. The dive had dropped him dangerously low. His engine sputtered, surged, coughed, then steadied at a weak, uneven rhythm. He was at the threshold where one more mistake meant falling out of the bomber stream entirely, becoming a lone, helpless target. Above him, German pilots who had been scattered now began regathering, tightening formation again. The next strike would be coordinated, forceful, and decisive, and Harker had only minutes of power left. If you're enjoying this documentary, please like the video and share it with fellow World War II enthusiasts. Hit subscribe as well. Your support really matters and keeps this channel moving forward. Every escort pilot could recall the moment when instinct overtook fear, when survival calculations fell away, and only the raw logic of combat remained. For Harker, that moment arrived as 4 FW-190A6s appeared behind the bomber stream, closing fast in a tight, lethal formation. These weren't probing fighters. They were executioners. Their 20mm cannons could cleave a B-24 in half if they reached firing distance, and their approach vector was perfect. The tail gunners braced, knowing full well that rear assaults were often the deadliest in daylight raids across northern Germany. Yet Harker's crippled Mustang was still there, hovering beneath the formation like a wounded guardian refusing to fall. He tried to climb, but the engine barely responded. The temperature gauges had long passed safe limits. The rhythmic clatter under the cowling signaled metal deforming under stress. There was no thrust left to meet the incoming attack. So he did the only thing physics still allowed. He dove. He pushed the stick forward and let gravity take the Mustang into a sudden, steep drop that carried him directly toward the attacking German fighters. It was a maneuver as desperate as it was dangerous, but the psychology of air combat often hinged on surprise. The four FW-190s had expected no resistance from below. No escort pilot should have been capable of such a move with a degraded engine. Seeing the Mustang rise suddenly toward them, the German formation flinched. Two fighters veered sharply outward, losing their firing lane. The remaining pair pulled up too quickly, exposing their bellies to the Liberators' tail guns. A coordinated torrent of 50 caliber fire struck them in overlapping arcs, shredding control surfaces and forcing both pilots to abort the attack. The bomber formation held intact. For a few seconds, the sky went eerily quiet. No tracers, no dives. Only the cough and sputter of the Mustang's dying engine. Harker leveled out inches beneath the lowest bomber, the propeller slowing with every turn. He was out of altitude, out of speed, and nearly out of time. Yet the FW-190s did not reform for another pass. They had lost surprise, lost timing, and lost the rhythm essential for coordinated strikes. In the doctrine manuals, success was measured in ratios and confirmed kills. But in the real sky over Northern Europe, it was measured in seconds. Seconds stolen, seconds denied, seconds earned. And Harker had bought just enough for the Liberators to escape the deadliest stretch of their route. Only when the firing ceased did awareness ripple through the bomber line. One waist gunner spotted it first, the battered Mustang drifting beneath them, oil streaked across its fuselage like black veins against metal. Exhaust sputtered in uneven bursts. The aircraft wobbled with every gust, not as a machine in control, but as one balancing on the edge of mechanical collapse. Soon more gunners saw it, then the lead navigator, then the bombardier. The realization settled in like a delayed shock. This single fighter, running on borrowed moments, had absorbed the full brunt of interception. Meanwhile, far away in East Anglia, mission planners traced the formation's progress on plotting boards. They marked altitude, timing, expected losses. The route the Liberators were flying rarely spared the first wave. Luftwaffe units defending northern Germany were aggressive and disciplined. Yet as the minutes passed, no bomber disappeared from the chart. Not one. Analysts exchanged uncertain looks. Their numerical models had no category for a mission where the first wave returned intact. In the sky, Harker's engine deteriorated rapidly. The once strong hum of the Packard Merlin had become a harsh, wet rasp. Each cylinder fired unevenly, each vibration signaling imminent failure. The bombers radioed ahead for any escort group that could assist him, but weather had disrupted the handoff. No aircraft could reach him in time. He was alone. With altitude slowly bleeding away, Harker throttled back until the propeller windmilled freely. The Mustang entered a long, fragile descent toward the water. Above him, the 14 B-24s continued westward, still tight in formation. Their wings bore holes. Their engines leaked coolant. Some tail sections shook from shrapnel damage. But every bomber was alive. Not one had been forced down. The improbability of it struck the crews only after the adrenaline ebbed. As Harker scanned the terrain below, searching for any coastline, marsh, or open field he might reach, the men in the bombers understood what they had witnessed. His presence had filled the one seam the Luftwaffe always aimed for. He had held that position even when his aircraft barely could. The formation owed its intact return not to doctrine, but to judgment, one pilot's refusal to abandon them. And ahead, the English coast waited for a fighter barely holding on to its last breath. History rarely records the quiet finales, the moments after the chaos, when survival narrows into silence. For Harker, those final minutes stretched painfully long. His Mustang glided over restless gray water, the engine silent now except for the faint windmilling of the propeller. The English coastline shimmered through a veil of low clouds, close enough to hope, far enough to fear. Every movement of the control stick felt heavier as altitude bled away. One misjudged angle, one gust from the channel, and the fighter would vanish beneath the waves before any rescue crew could reach it. Then through a gap in the mist, a strip of marshland appeared. Uneven, narrow, but reachable. Harker lowered the landing gear, half expecting them to collapse instantly. The wheels extended with a sluggish, reluctant motion. Whether they locked was impossible to know. He lined up his glide path, holding the nose level, coaxing every remaining foot of altitude from the dying airframe. The ground rushed upward. The impact was brutal. The wheels touched the marsh, bounced violently, then struck again, harder. The Mustang skidded through reeds, tearing a muddy trench as the nose dipped forward. With a final shuddering groan, the propeller blades bent against the earth, and the aircraft lurched to a stop. Harker exhaled for the first time since cutting. The engine, his hands trembling from shock and exhaustion. Hours later, local recovery crews found him still seated on the wing, staring upward at the sky where fading contrails stretched toward the horizon. Those lines belonged to the Liberators he had protected, now miles away, headed toward base, landing one by one with crews who finally understood what had shielded them. Word traveled slowly through the squadrons. Surprising pilots who had assumed the aggressive escort maneuvering came from a fully functional fighter. None had realized the Mustang beneath them had nearly failed from the beginning. Mission analysts studying the improbable zero-loss raid would search for patterns, charts, and tactical missteps by the Luftwaffe. But the explanation would remain human, not statistical. And as the evening sun dipped behind the marsh, the quiet around Harker said more than any mission report ever could. During the debriefing that night, analysts traced enemy attack vectors on ASTATE overlays, matching them against gun camera footage and Luftwaffe loss claims. The data told a puzzling story. The Germans had executed their standard interception pattern correctly: sun dives, climbing underbelly attacks, coordinated multi-angle strikes. Yet none of these had forced a bomber out of formation. The planners expected to see at least a handful of B-24s downed or straggling. Instead, they confronted a clean return, an outcome the models did not predict. Piece by piece, testimonies from gunners and flight officers converged on one revelation. A single damaged Mustang had repeatedly disrupted the Luftwaffe's firing lanes. Each intervention had been small, seconds stolen, angles denied, timing broken. But combined, they created the one condition bomber doctrine depended on, yet could never guarantee: continuity. The formation stayed whole long enough to pass through the worst of the defensive belt. What Harker demonstrated wasn't recklessness. It was the quiet truth buried beneath thousands of sorties in the European air campaign. Doctrine worked until it didn't. Rotation charts, altitude blocks, and rigid escort sequences functioned only when conditions were perfect. But conditions in war rarely were. Winds scattered formations. Cloud banks upended timing. Engines faltered. Decisions made at 25,000 feet often demanded flexibility that diagrams on briefing room walls couldn't capture. Harker's failing engine forced a choice no manual anticipated: stay and fill the gap, even if it meant losing the aircraft. The USAAF never adopted his actions as policy. Institutional systems rarely embrace exceptions. But the bomber crews who flew above him that day carried the memory long after the war ended. For them, the vision of a limping Mustang holding the line while German fighters closed in became a reminder that survival sometimes hinged on judgment rather than instructions. Decades later, historians analyzing mission records would note the eerie absence of bombers lost during that raid, marking it as an anomaly in a brutal winter campaign. But those who understood the air war knew the truth. Occasionally, victory rested not on perfect machinery or flawless doctrine, but on the will of a single pilot refusing to turn away. And in the fading contrails above northern Europe, that lesson lingered long after the engines fell silent. If you've made it this far, you're one of us, searching for the truth behind the headlines and the courage behind the silence. Subscribe to the channel, and let's keep exploring the hidden wars, secret operations, and untold fates that shape the world we live in.